So welcome. Welcome everybody to the 2022 MIT Policy Hackathon. We're thrilled to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us in person. Um, my name is Jorge Sandoval. I'm a second year graduate student in the Technology and Policy program, and I'm the chair of the organizing committee for this year. I would like to give you all a great welcome to this event. We're so happy to have you here. It's funny because I was here a year ago, and it feels like it was just a month ago. I mean, organizing this event twice has been one of the craziest experience of my life. However, the reason why I'm here again this year is because I believe that this is an opportunity for people from all around the world to connect in the field of technology policy, which has become so important as we as a society become aware of the implications of technology, of the power it holds, and also how technology centered in a human society could look differently from the way it looks now. The theme that we have decided for this year, a new regeneration, is actually two. Is the words a new generation and a new regeneration. As we are coming out of a very difficult time after the pandemic, we are seeing the opportunity to change things, to regenerate, and try to come to terms to the difficulties of regenerating the climate, regenerating the ecosystems that we have destroyed, and also trying to deal with the inequalities and injustices that exist in the world. I believe that that task of regeneration can be done by a new generation that is not looking forward to do things for free or not looking forward to do things easily, but rather to sit down and take down the complicated aspect of human life and technology and try to deal with messiness of it. I believe that an opportunity of having people that can be both aware of the complexities of human behavior, but also of the rationalities and the scalability features of technology can produce much more holistic and integrative solution to these ideas. I truly am amazed by all the things that I have seen with the Policy Hackathon in this past couple of years. And I totally encourage you to give your best, to try the most, and hopefully in 1 year from today, this hackathon will have made the world a little bit better. Thank you. Something very important that we also try to do in this institution is try to deal with to recognize our past. And for that, we always try to have a land acknowledgement procedure on all of our ceremonies. Just very briefly, we want to recognize that MIT acknowledges indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between the land and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. Thank you. Now we're going to have some words from the Director of the Technology and Policy Program, Noel Celine.
Hi, thank you. And hopefully you can all hear me. So on behalf of MIT's Technology and Policy Program, I just wanted to offer my welcome to the 2022 MIT Policy Hackathon. And thanks to Jorge and the rest of the organizers for getting this off the ground. I hope you're looking forward to a really exciting weekend. Again, I'm Noel Celine. I direct the Technology and Policy Program at MIT. And I'm also a professor at MIT in our Institute for Data Systems and Society and the Department of Earth, Atmospheric and Planetary Sciences. So at MIT's Technology and Policy Program, we aim to address big societal challenges through research and education at the intersection of technology and policy. And this policy hackathon is really a flagship student-run event for technology and policy and for the Institute for Data Systems and Society at MIT. We're especially pleased to have people both in the room and online joining us from across the world. One of the distinguishing characteristics of the MIT Policy Hackathon is that, like much of our work at TPP, it really requires teams that come from a wide range of backgrounds, from public policy to data science to all sorts of areas of science and engineering and beyond. And what we've seen is that the most successful teams are really able to work collaboratively across those boundaries. and together with stakeholders, the policy challenge sponsors, really have found unique solutions that are both useful and implementable, and solutions that have real world impact. This is the type of transdisciplinary research that we encourage at MIT's Technology and Policy program, but it's also the type of research that's really so needed to address some of the world's biggest challenges. I was really excited to hear the theme for this year was a new regeneration, with its really interesting double meaning, as Jorge underlined. And we really hope that you'll be inspired by the different challenges presented to you this weekend to really generate that new generation of leaders. We need a new generation to step up and address these challenges. And these participants can come from all parts of the world. We need all of the expertise we can get. These are really big challenges, and they're important to society. Again, I want to say special thanks to our sponsors, both within and outside MIT, to all the challenge partners, especially to the Student Organizing Committee for all of their work to get this event together. This is really a 100% student organized event, and it's really the students of MIT that make this happen. Everything that you see here, from the recruiting of challenge sponsors to all the logistics, is the product of MIT students. So we're really excited that this is such a successful group of people. And I also want to thank the many others who are volunteering their time by participating as mentors and judges. And finally, just a quick note that all of you are here because you are interested in the intersection of technology and policy. And for that reason, I'd like to invite you to continue to be part of the Technology and Policy Program community in whatever way you can. Those of you who are in the Boston area are welcome to participate in our speakers and events on campus. You can also sign up for our newsletter on our website, tpp.mit.edu, if you just click subscribe. And some of you even might wish to join us as future students in our 2-year research-based master's program. If you'd like more information on that, see our website, attend one of our webinars, or talk with some of the students from the program who are participating this weekend. So again, thank you for your participation. Thanks for your enthusiasm and energy, and all the best with the challenges.
Thank you very much, Noel. We also should congratulate them because they did amazingly well in their applications. We received more than 450 applications from 52 nations, and we have joining us today more than 240 people have agreed to participate to this hackathon from 46 countries. We hope that you can also not just connect here in person, but also try to chat with all the different people that are joining us online. So we will follow our agenda, but first I'll have my colleague Peter talk to you for a second. Give me a second. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Jorge. So first, as Noel highlighted, I would love to say thank you to our wonderful sponsors. As you can see, we have the MIT Energy Initiative, Brecca Siemens, who is here with us in person. Thank you for joining us. IDSS and TPP, Great Learning, Tech Congress, MIT CEPR, the MIT Washington office, and the Graduate Student Council. So thank you, all of their support. This event could not happen without them, and we are super thankful to all of our sponsors, and also our challenge partners, who we have the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee this year with our Logistics Challenge, the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance with our Housing Challenge, the Natural Resources Defense Council with our Environmental Justice Challenge, and CloudSec and Omidar Network in India for our Cybersecurity Challenge. And we'll get into more of the challenge specifics shortly here. So as you all know, or I hope you know, the winner of each of the 4 categories, each team will have a $1,000 cash prize. But we do continue to also encourage partnerships within your teams, within your challenge partners, and within your groups. This is meant to be an event that brings together some of the brightest minds in science and technology to help us solve really challenging policy problems. And so we want you to network with each other, get to know one another, whether that's online through our Slack channels, those of you that are here in person during our meal times. We want this to be a fun and create a competitive environment, but also know that this is meant to help build relationships and connections as well. So tomorrow, just quickly, we have 2 speakers. Oh, I switched to the next one, sorry.
Oh.
Sorry, some key logistics.
Okay.
Slack is going to be the center of all of our communications. So you should all be on the Slack channel. If you are not on the Slack channel, either come find us in person after this opening ceremony or message us on Slack, and we will make sure that we get you on Slack. don't message us on Slack, message us on the Q&A on Zoom, and we'll make sure to get you on Slack. And then the biggest key deadlines is that team formation needs to be done by 7 p.m. tonight, directly after the opening ceremony and challenge Q&A session. If you do still not have a team, we will work with you to get you on one. Team challenge registration. So after the opening ceremony, you'll have from 7 to 8:30 p.m. To work with your teams to decide what your challenge preferences are. And then we will send out which challenge you are allocated to tonight. And then the biggest deadline to know of is 10 a.m. on Sunday is when your materials are due for the challenge. And then we will start our judging round Sunday at 11. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, but these are all on the agenda on the website and will be posted around here in person at MIT's campus.
Should I go back?
No. So our opening keynote, who we're very happy to have with us today, is Senator Chris Hansen. I will let him introduce himself, but Senator Chris Hansen is an MIT TPP alum. He also holds his PhD from the University of Oxford and has worked in the energy space for several years now. And he is currently serving as a senator at the Colorado State Senate, representing East Denver, Senate District 31. And I will go ahead and turn it over to him.
All right. Hey, Peter. Great to see you. Great to be with everyone tonight. Really excited to see what comes out of this hackathon. Such a pleasure to be able to join you as a TPP alum, and wish I could be there in person. Would love to be in Cambridge with you this evening, but stuck in Denver with a bunch of meetings. We're getting ready for kind of preparing for next session, and as you may have heard, there's this little thing called the election coming up in a few weeks, and so doing a lot of work on the political side as well. But the reason I love doing this job and the reason I was so happy to be invited tonight is I really tried my best to take my engineering background and my time at MIT and my time in graduate school and turn it into being able to use that training, that expertise in the public policy frame, and have been in the Colorado legislature for the past 6 years, with 3 years in the Senate and kind of in the middle of my first term in the Colorado Senate. And have had a chance to work on tons of different policy areas. I currently serve as vice chair of the budget committee and chair Senate appropriations. So get to do a lot of time on tax and budget work. Turns out all those time doing spreadsheets and macros actually are paying off for me here in the budget committee. So putting some of those math skills to work. But my main focus area has really been in the energy and environmental space, and my research project when I was at TPP was how to reduce carbon emissions in the Chinese electricity sector. Went on and did a PhD looking at how to do that in the Indian electricity sector. And now I'm trying to apply those lessons to how we can drastically reduce emissions in the state of Colorado in the electricity sector and beyond. We've done dozens of bills that have certainly applied to decarbonizing the electricity system and improving the electricity system, but also a lot of work on the other parts of our emission profile. So transportation is now, of course, the single biggest piece of the overall emissions pie, but lots of work to do in decreasing emissions in the built environment, decreasing emissions from the ag sector, decreasing emissions all across the economy. And that's what we're trying to do as rapidly as we can in Colorado. And it's really been wonderful to take what I've learned during grad school in places like MIT and try to apply those skills to what we're doing here at the Colorado legislature. So I think, Peter, I know you had you said there might be questions that are going to come up. I'm very happy to take those and also very happy to dive deeper into any particular policy areas that folks want. Kind of one of my biggest focused areas in the last couple of years has been on improving the Western power grid, which is one of those things that can be a conversation killer at a cocktail party. But as all of you know, as engineers, nothing more important than making sure that we've got a very well integrated and efficient, smooth running power grid. And if anybody in the room is from Texas, you'll know the difficulties that can happen if you don't have a great power grid. And so one of my big areas legislatively, and again, trying to use my engineering background, is to get Colorado well integrated into the rest of the Western grid. And I think ultimately intercontinental power grid. So we'll be able to integrate more wind, solar, batteries into the system at low cost. So that's been a really big area of focus and a place where there's a huge amount of leverage when it comes to decarbonization, because of course, if you have a clean grid and low prices, that makes it very easy to electrify everything in the economy, from heat pumps to light duty vehicles and beyond. So that's been a big place where I think Colorado has been able to lead, and a place where I've been able to do a lot of work over the last couple of years. And one of the ways that my graduate training at MIT has really helped me do this job better in the Colorado Senate. So Peter, with that, let me turn it back to you, see if there are any questions folks want to cover, or if there are any particular policy areas that would be useful to talk about. I know it looks like you've got one of your areas with NRDC on climate justice. That's also an area where we've done a lot of legislation in Colorado, and I think we've been able to lead on that front. But happy to go into detail on any other particular areas that participants would want to cover.
Yeah, thank you very much. It looks like we might have one question already. So someone was wondering, what do you think the hardest sectors to abate in the United States will be, and moving forward, maybe what we've already worked on previously?
Yeah, I think I can tell you what the easiest sector is going to be. It's going to be the electricity sector, and we're already proving that, I think, across the world. I think the hardest to abate sectors are really, the built environment. I think agriculture is going to be challenging. And then there are certain parts of manufacturing and industrial processes that I think are going to be relatively difficult. We're starting down the path here, especially in the built environment. But of course, there's long-lived assets, take a long time to turn over. We've got a huge amount of existing building stock. And so, we've got updated codes, we've got incentives in place now for heat pumps and electrifying hot water heaters, et cetera. But it just takes a long time for that to turn over. And so I think figuring out how we can accelerate that is going to be one of our big challenges when it comes to the built environment. On the ag sector, again, some big processes that create a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that are going to be difficult to decarbonize. We are doing some new legislation in Colorado on wet digesters, dry digesters, to try to turn animal residue and manure, ag waste into perhaps renewable natural gas or other fuels. So lots of interesting new technologies coming forward on that front, but that's going to remain very difficult. And then the final thing I'd mention is on the industrial side. Many processes, from beer making to different manufacturing processes, all have a lot of emissions that are going to be difficult to decarbonize. And it's one of the areas where I think things like green hydrogen can play a big role, because there are certainly going to be some applications that will be very difficult to electrify. And so even 100% renewable electricity doesn't get you the whole way there. And so I think that's going to be some of the future challenges that we need to tackle. In the meantime, huge amount of low-hanging fruit when it comes to all the easier places to decarbonize. And so while we're looking at options for the tough places, we just need to move much more rapidly on the ones we already have figured out. And that's what we're trying to do in Colorado.
Awesome, thank you. Another question we had that I think is a really great one, coming in with someone with science and data background, going into a policy sector, what do you think constitutes a feasible policy solution? How do you qualify a policy solution that might come up, and think about what might be the top areas you look at to make sure that it's something that could possibly be done?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a running joke that I use at the Capitol, which is physics undefeated for 14.5 billion years. We get proposals that just do not, respect the second law of thermodynamics or physics. And I think that's always kind of a challenge, is to take different ideas and really hold them up to scrutiny and look at the data and try to do the research to come up with the best policy. And this is where I think training at a place like MIT and sticking around for my PhD later, has really helped me, because I been able to do that homework, do that research, and try to bring that expertise into our policymaking process. One of the things I do over the summer that Peter is very familiar with is run the Colorado Engineering and Science Policy Fellowship, where there's just not many ways for scientists and engineers to get involved in policy, and compared to, folks coming out of the legal profession or political science majors. And so that's one thing that I'm really trying to do, is build up more interest and more uptake from scientists and engineers to get directly involved in policymaking at the state, local, federal level. And I know TPP's got some great opportunities to get to DC and to see federal policymaking. But don't forget the importance of what's happening in state capitals around the country as well, where typically our biggest advances in policy, first happen at the state level, like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, were preceded first by local action and then action in DC. And so, I think that's really what I've been trying to do, is get more scientists and engineers engaged, have that expertise. And the final thing I'll say is, every year in Colorado, we look at about 800 different bills or proposals, and well over 500 of them have some kind of science and engineering or policy, technical policy aspect to them. And so it's so badly needed to have science and engineering backgrounds at the state capitol. And that's what I'm just trying to beef that up and encourage that as much as I possibly can.
Yeah. One other good one I think we have up here is looking at polarization across the US, maybe in Colorado or even across the world. What are your strategies, and how do you think we can best persuade people either across the aisle or present policy in a way that is attractive to all people that are decision makers? And if you have any tips that you might have used in Colorado specifically that has helped you achieve that.
Yeah, Colorado, as some of you may be aware, is a state that leans to the left. It's a light blue or blue state. In our current makeup, the governor's office and both chambers of the legislature are in Democrats' control. But that said, we do a huge amount of bipartisan work, and most of my bills have bipartisan support. And I try really hard to reach out across the aisle, work with some other really great members on the Republican side who are ready to dive in and solve problems. There's certainly things that we disagree about. There are, folks in the Republican Party who don't think climate change is even real. And so, there's going to be some fundamental disagreements where bipartisan work is not going to be possible. But take, for example, the work I've done on the power grid. I did that bill with a bipartisan sponsor. It was a Republican from the West Slope of Colorado and up in the mountains, conservative member of the Senate, but he had a very good understanding that his community, his part of the state, was not going to thrive, was not going to get investment if they didn't have a strong power grid. And so that was something we had a lot of agreement on. I certainly was super concerned about, the decarbonization and the emissions that we could reduce. He was probably less so, but what he did know was that there were lots of great jobs and lots of investment that would come if we have a strong power grid. So I think you just find those areas where you have agreement, really work hard to cultivate those. And I've consistently been, rewarded in going down that path. And I think that's how I hope to continue to legislate and do that in a bipartisan way.
Yeah, if you've got time for a few more questions, I think we have a couple good ones left. One of them is, how do you think we can best leverage diversity in policy creation? And how can people bring their own experiences into that concept?
Yeah, the idea of having many voices with lots of different backgrounds and lots of experiences, that absolutely every single time improves the policymaking process. And diversity can take on lots of different forms, right? There's gender diversity, ethnic diversity, racial diversity. What I was describing before was sort of training diversity. Like, we need more scientists and engineers to go along with all the lawyers and poli-sci background. And so, I guess what I have really seen at the Colorado State Capitol is that we've got elected officials who, represent the state, very diverse set of House of Representatives, very diverse state Senate in many ways. And then you add on to that great staff who come from a variety of backgrounds and upbringings. And, that really puts us in a great place to make great policy. And I think, I would say we have improved, but we're still not there as far as making sure every voice gets heard. But I think we have a very public and transparent process here in Colorado. Every bill gets a hearing. That's one of our constitutional rules. So unlike other states, we don't have, kind of pocket vetoes or chairs of committees who can make bills go away. And I think that helps to make sure that a variety of voices get heard, and every member of the House and the Senate can bring forward 5 bills. And all those bills are going to get a chance for a hearing in committee. And so I think that helps as well. So having a diverse body leads to a diverse set of ideas that get brought forward. And then we have very robust debate in the legislature around those ideas. So that's how I've seen it play out here at the state capitol in Denver.
Great, thank you so much for that insight. Someone was wondering, how did your experience working with the Chinese and Indian electricity markets and working in those policy spaces, how do you bring that back to somewhere like Colorado, or how do you apply experiences from those global industries into what you're working on now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there is a huge amount of kind of lessons learned. I think one of the first things that I definitely learned when I was at MIT was to be really humble as you start looking at difficult problems. I think the research project that I was involved in Shandong province, China, and then later was involved in looking at the electricity sector in Gujarat province in India. I think I learned perhaps the hard way that I did not have the answers. I might have been, a halfway decent engineer, but typically these problems are at most half technical, and typically more than a majority are more about political economy and making sure you understand the different social and economic pressures that are happening in those areas. And I just tried my best to stop, to listen, to be humble about, what I knew and what I didn't know before, bringing forward different ideas or potential solutions. And I think that training in environments where, I was not the local, clearly in China or in India, taking that learning and then bringing it back to a situation like the state capitol in Colorado, where you've got to listen and understand before you start giving your speech and proposing something. And I think that was an important lesson for me, and something that I think has helped me when I've remembered that lesson, has really helped me at the Capitol and in the state Senate.
Yeah. So with our hackers, they have 48 hours, or a little less than 48 hours, starting from tonight until Sunday at 10 a.m. They'll be given a hackathon challenge statement, and they'll be working to hack those policy challenges. And so as they head into this next 36 or so hours, do you have any piece of advice you'd give them for, what's the best strategy approach, or how would you approach a challenge if you had 36 hours, which you have done, I'm sure, being approached with a bill, maybe the day before session ends? How would you approach starting hacking, and do you have any pieces of advice you could offer?
Have your favorite form of caffeine ready to go. No, I have no doubt everybody at MIT's knows how to work late into the night. But I think, start with really getting to know each other. I think one of the other things I've tried to do at the Colorado Capitol is make sure I know my fellow lawmakers so that I can kind of understand their viewpoint, where they're coming from. Do they have kids? Which part of the state are they from? Try to go kind of walk a mile in their shoes and understand who they are, and then dive into problem solving. And maybe if I have one piece of advice for each of the groups, is just before you immediately go into brainstorming about solutions, take some time, take 15, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it takes to get to know each other and kind of understand where people's points of view are starting from, where you're coming from, what is important to each of the members of the team. And I think that's investment up front in the hackathon will pay off for you over the 36 hours. And I've certainly experienced that myself here in the legislature.
Yeah. I also realized I've been taking all the questions from online. Did anybody in the room have a question they wanted to ask? Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for speaking with us today.
I don't think he can hear you. You have to come here.
Okay,
Yeah.
come over.
I could always repeat the question. Yeah.
I can hear pretty well, actually. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was wondering how your experience in policy has shaped your views on the Colorado River drought, and how you think that the intersection of tech and policy might be able to help with that issue.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning the Colorado River, which of course headwaters are here in the state. And you're absolutely right. We are in a the worst drought that we can find in the tree rings for 1,200 years. So we have massive shortages in the Colorado River Basin. The Colorado part of it, we've still working hard on conservation efforts to try to be able to have more water available for the entire basin. Places like Arizona, Nevada, seeing significant cuts that they've got to make in the very near term in the lower basin states versus the upper basin. But we're all in this together. And I think back to my joke about physics is undefeated. We are in the middle of significant impacts from climate change. It is reducing the snowpack in the Rockies. That leads to low flow in the Colorado Basin. And we are, paying the price for the climate change impacts in the Western United States. And it's going to get worse. It's not getting better. We know climate change impacts are going to accelerate. We know about the inertia in the system and the climate models, many of which, I first worked on when I was at MIT and all the great researchers there. And so we have a pretty good sense that things are going to get worse as these impacts accelerate. And so I guess for me, it means talking clearly with my colleagues about the urgency to address climate change and the urgency to be way more efficient with how we're using water and reusing water. And so that means for Denver, the place I represent, we need to stop using bluegrass on our lawns and switch over to native grasses and, xeriscaping as fast as we can. In fact, we did a state bill on that last year to incentivize people to convert their lawns over to low use, because we transfer a lot of water from the West Slope across the Continental Divide through a tunnel over to the Front Range of Colorado, so we can use it, for my front yard. And so everybody has to do their part, whether you're urban or rural, whether you're a farmer or whether you're living in a suburb. All of us are going to have to get way smarter about how we use water, because the constraint is going to just get worse and worse because of climate change. And so, human brain is not great at nonlinear change, like understanding something that is accelerating. And that's exactly what's happening with climate change impacts. And so I really just try to talk with my colleagues about the urgency of our action, both on water conservation, but also addressing climate change. And I think the Colorado River Basin is sort of like the perfect case study of, are we going to do what we need to do to address this emergency, or are we instead, going to experience the proverbial train wreck? And I'm trying hard to avoid the train wreck.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in here? Okay, I think we have one last question on the Q&A, which will segue us nicely into our challenge introductions, as one of them is environmental justice. But the question asks, renewable energy is growing fast. However, some controversies have happened because the projects land on either indigenous reserves with the Navajo nations, or there's just some issues as we're experiencing this quick decarbonization transition. And so could you share any experiences you have with legislation on how to incorporate environmental justice during policy creation?
Yeah, this is a super important question. I was talking earlier about the decarbonization of the electricity sector. That is the easiest to decarbonize. And the easiest thing to do is shut down old coal plants because they're highly polluting and they make no economic sense. But when you do that, you're disproportionately going to be impacting communities that have relied on those plants. And that is certainly true in the Four Corners area. So in all 4 states that make up the Four Corners, especially Arizona and New Mexico, and to a little lesser extent, Colorado, we've got coal-fired stations that are either in or adjacent to indigenous tribes, Native American tribal areas, and in Arizona in particular. And so when those coal plants close down, you have immediate job loss. You have immediate loss in property taxes and revenue and sales tax and income tax. And what we've tried to do in Colorado is to really prepare for that as we close down the coal facilities. And I passed a bill in 2019 that set a very clear target for those closures and put in a financial mechanism called securitization so that we could have the funds available to help with those transition efforts in places like the Four Corners area where those plants are closing down. And so it creates tens of millions of dollars for helping workers to transition, for covering the property tax so that local governments don't go over a fiscal cliff, for making sure that we've got economic development funds so that we can create new jobs in those areas and help that transition so that we don't see, just a total collapse from the closure of those coal-fired power stations. So historically, the U.S. has been terrible at this. I mean, if you think about the Rust Belt problems in the Midwest and the demise of manufacturing in the 60s and 70s and 80s, we didn't have anything in place. We weren't there to help people at the scale that was needed. And my hope is that, the Colorado approach or other great approaches that are out there can be done rapidly, can be done with high fidelity to help. And we're doing our best to try to prove that in Colorado to be ready for those plants as they close throughout the rest of this decade.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Senator Hansen. Really appreciate having you here. Kickstarting us off. I think we got some great insight as we start our hacking for the weekend. I don't know if you have any closing remarks, but we just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for the invite. I wish I could have been there with you in Cambridge. I miss MIT all the time, but I'll look forward to hearing from Peter about what comes out of your efforts over the next day and a half.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks everybody.
With that, I believe we are going to transition to our organizing committee member, Deepika, who will introduce our cybersecurity challenge.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deepika. I'm a first-year student at the Technology and Policy program, along with Peter. I've been looking specifically at the cybersecurity challenge statement for you folks at this edition of the hackathon, and I will do a quick job presenting it. We will also have time with our challenge sponsor sometime tomorrow. It's currently 3 a.m. in India, so they're not here with us. So let me do a quick introduction to what we have in store for you. So I'm not going to bore your ear off with the statistics of how much digitization has happened in the last decade, how much COVID-19 has sort of accelerated that further. We're aware of all of this, and we're also aware that as we all move to an increasingly digitized world, there's a lot of data breaches that are getting reported day in, day out. But specifically, we want to shift our gaze a little bit from a more from a Western European centric perspective to more developing economies. It's an interesting segment because a lot of the internet penetration here is through mobile internet, and that sort of networks give a lot of show a lot of vulnerability to attack. So we've been seeing in the last few years the number of data breaches that are being reported out of these countries has been increasing. Regulation and laws in the security and data privacy space have also been coming up, and very different interesting perspectives that they are presenting as well, but they haven't been able to keep pace with the rapid digitization that's happening. So given that we're all increasingly driven to this world, we want you to think about, apart from just regulatory notions, apart from just laws and rules, what are other incentives that we can think of for businesses to make the online experience more secure for their customers. I want to quickly introduce the two challenge partners that we have for this statement. The first one is CloudSec. CloudSec is an AI-powered digital risk protection platform. They create customized tools and monitoring systems for their clients so that they can keep track of their systems real time. The other partner that we have is Umidyar Network India. They're from the bigger Umidyar group. They've been investing in entrepreneurs, partnering with nonprofits, governments, and companies across the world to sort of create social impact at scale. In specific, they have the Digital Society Initiative, where where the vision is to ensure that citizens feel safe when they're benefiting from the use of technology, either in governance strategies or as they subscribe to private practices as well. I will quickly go to what we're expecting out of this challenge here. BeVigil is a platform that CloudSec has developed, which has sort of indexed millions of applications and got, it's a very rich data set where you can see all of the security reports that the organization has created on them. But right now, the challenge is that it's been a lot of the work is done manually. They're following up with these companies once they find vulnerabilities. It's about thinking about which person to talk to, how to follow up on making sure that systems are built into place, and how do we do it at scale. So this is one of the hiccups that they're facing. So we want to think about what is a platform where we can bring in users as well as developers together to sort of create easy communication and what expectations are. How do we create incentives for companies to pick this up? How do we also think about not inundating users with like consent fatigue, but also think about just strengthening our systems. So towards this, we'll be sharing a larger problem statement with you. But these are general things that we want you to look towards. What market infrastructure can essentially be built towards increasing cybersecurity awareness. This will be shared with you a little, towards the end of all the challenge statements being presented, and you will be able to look at the data as well. That's it from me. I think Peter will come back to you. Oh, sorry, who's next? Okay, yeah, Aurora. Yeah. Aurora is going to present the housing challenge next. Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, cool. Okay, I'm Aurora. I'll be presenting the, I wanted to introduce our challenge partner this year for the housing challenge. So we're partnering this year with the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance, which is a nonprofit public policy advocacy group that aims to address the homelessness crisis by advocating for policies that address the systemic failures of housing and mental health in Massachusetts. And tonight we have Joe Finn joining us to present this challenge. He is the president and executive director of Mahasa.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aurora. Again, as Aurora said, my name's Joe Finn, and I'm the president and executive director of the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance. And I've spent about the last 25 years or so trying to come up with outcome-based, evidence-based programs to address both new innovative models of service delivery that focus not so much on emergency resources, but permanent supportive housing. And given the fact, I have to admit, I'm feeling a little anxious here because I was an arts and humanities major. So let me begin, as I begin most things, with a story. And that story goes back to about 8 years ago when we were developing one of the first Pay for Success programs around housing unaccompanied adults who are experiencing homelessness, who had disabilities, primarily serious mental illness or substance use disorder. And at that time in Massachusetts, they estimated that they counted about 1,500 unaccompanied adult people who were experiencing homelessness who had met those characteristics. And we were able to identify and establish about 500 to 800 existing housing opportunities in which to move people into working and partnering with about 22 agencies across the Commonwealth. And a public official from Massachusetts was so excited about this because what he said was, geez, 500 to 800, that means that you'll be able to reduce chronic homelessness in Massachusetts by about a third. Now, I never took a math course or a science course that I didn't get a C- in, but even I knew that there was some faulty reasoning in that. And it's based on an impression that we have related to homelessness, that somehow homelessness is a static problem and that it's a homogeneous population of people, all of the same characteristics. And of course, that's not true. Homelessness is not a static problem. And for all of the numbers of people that you have moving beyond homelessness, you also have people frequently, again, who are entering into homelessness at that same time. And again, about 80% of the people who actually experience homelessness, right, that it's simply a socioeconomic issue. They've lost a job, they lost their apartment, they can't find housing. And so homelessness is a very short experience. And once they resolve that issue, they move on. But for a smaller, but that's about 80% of people who experience homelessness. But for a smaller part of that population, and yet the group we spend the most resources on, about, again, 10 to 20% are what we refer to as chronic or episodic homeless. And these are folks who usually have some type of life-limiting disability, such as serious mental illness or substance use disorders. And again, they're often homeless for significant periods of time. One of the sad things in that same PFS program, we housed a person who had actually been homeless for 30 years. Can you imagine going to a shelter for 30 years every day of your life? And so one of the things that we had really understood, again, regardless of those different characteristics, is that at the same time, the core common denominator around all of homelessness is housing. And yet we know that for that population, that chronic and episodic population, we can actually resolve their situations through a housing setup. And again, what happened is, as this went on, we began to wonder, well, how do we create some kind of predictive modeling around the number of units that we would need over a specific period of time by gauging who's coming in the front door, so to speak, as well as those that were moving beyond homelessness. And what happened, we were able to work with a sociologist from Boston University, as well as Dr. Sangumbai Mayeba from the University of Denver, and they were able to focus in with the data that they had on housing opportunities that would have to be in place, so to speak, in order to have a plan over a specific period of time, in order to make a serious dent in the number of these folks who are experiencing this type of chronic homelessness. But every time that we would bring that back to state officials, the question that they would always ask, that they would come back to is, well, that's great, but how many new units, how many newly constructed units would be required to be able to address this segment of the population? Because those are the things that we primarily fund. Now, I don't think it's any secret to anyone is that there are, again, Massachusetts has a serious inventory problem. And if you, depending on where you read, it's 100 to a couple of 100,000 units that Massachusetts needs just to meet its current inventory of housing that's going to be required over the next few years. And again, we can see that they are able to predict. They must use some type of modeling to predict how much new construction is necessary for that amount. Now, I'm concerned with a subset here. I'm concerned about a group of people who are living in our in encampments that go from Pittsfield to the Cape. I'm concerned about the people I'm sure you see every day in Cambridge, along the streets of Cambridge. I'm concerned, again, about people for whom emergency mass shelter has become their acceptable housing niche. We know what works. We know what works to resolve those people's dilemma. The difficulty is we have not yet figured out how necessarily to bring that to scale. In order to bring that to scale, it becomes very critical for us to be able to understand what level of new construction would be required over the next several years to be able to bring us to a point where we might be able to achieve this mythical functional zero that we hear so much about. By that, simply put, we mean how will we know when we have sufficient housing to be able to address this incredibly damaging, this incredibly costly approach to homelessness and be able to deal with this particular group of people who's become a scandal in our Commonwealth and in our nation. We meet many challenges on the public side. There's, within public officials, oftentimes there's a sense if you quantify something, you own it. But this is a whole brand new area in terms of trying to utilize such predictive modeling in order to solve a difficult problem like homelessness. You know, I've just been thinking as I see the different problems that I've seen being outlined as part of this particular hackathon, which again, I'm just so honored to be participating in with you. I think that there's some of those things you might be able to say greater minds than yours have been trying to address some of those issues perhaps, but I can absolutely assure you that and there's a good chance that no greater minds than yours this weekend have been focusing on this issue of predictive modeling for how many new constructed units would be required as part of a plan to end homelessness. And so I want to assure all of you that regardless you know, of the contest dimensions of this, everything that you do is going to be contributing to the Massachusetts Housing and Shelters Alliance a struggle around trying to end this awful issue, this awful problem. So thank you and good luck and best wishes with all of it.
All right. So with that, okay, so with that, I will move us into the Environmental Justice Challenge. So this year we are partnered with the Natural Resources Defense Council, so NRDC. Quickly, I will just give an overview of NRDC. If you don't know what they are one of the largest environmental nonprofits in the United States. It has 700 scientists, lawyers, and policy advocates across the globe working to safeguard the earth, its people, its planets and animals, and the natural systems on which all life depends. With dedicated staff working in more than a dozen program areas, from clean energy to soils management to marine protection, they partner with businesses, elected leaders, and community groups on the biggest issues that we face today. And one of the key priorities for NRDC is advocating for an equitable, clean energy transition as part of the nation's commitment to cut US greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030 and to reach a net zero energy system by 2050. So this year, as I assume many of you know, the Inflation Reduction Act passed in the United States Congress. And so it provides $369 billion for clean energy and climate investments. Of that $369 billion, over $100 billion of it is to support power sector investments, including bonus incentives for development in low-income communities historically reliant on fossil fuel production, and on brownfields. Brownfields, if you are not aware of, we are going to talk about, and that is what we're going to focus on in this challenge. And the environmental justice concerns over renewable energy siting on brownfields can involve issues of how cleanup goals may be negatively impacted, alternative community use for immediate brownfields, and local impacts of renewable energy projects. So brownfield properties are often large, polluted, and underused land sites in areas with existing infrastructure needed to support renewable energy development. This could be transmission, this could be siting of renewables, e.g. wind and solar, and federal and state tax incentives and financing can create significant economic advantages to brownfields. But the redevelopment of brownfield sites can also raise concerns from impacted community members, and successful siting requires active community engagement and community-led processes. So if you want to take us to the challenge statement. So here we are looking at how policymakers can develop federal and/or state level methodologies, metrics, and policies to drive clean energy development to brownfields that maximizes environmental justice and climate benefits, and also incorporates community engagement and inclusion in decision making. So we want our groups to look at how can we first come up with the methodologies and the metrics to define how you can move this over $100 billion worth of funds to these brownfield sites. And then what are the ways that are currently existing for including communities and the environmental justice impact of these, of siting these technologies in these areas. So this can include aspects of community considerations. So this would include local control over site outcomes, local tax revenues, net metering credits, or leasing incomes to these communities that are affected by placing transmission or renewable sightings in their areas. And we also want to look at environmental justice concerns over renewable energy that how can involve how cleanup goals may be negatively impacted. So often brownfields have cleanup goals established by local communities. And if we are going to be citing technologies in these areas, is that going to affect those cleanup goals? Will it cause premature project completion? And how can that be incorporated? And so some of the key things we're going to look at is what is an estimate of the maximum capacity available from siting onshore wind and solar facilities on brownfields? And how can we maximize that capacity to compare with the level of renewables needed for deep decarbonization? We will look at what are the motivating factors for communities to support renewable energy siting on brownfields? And then we want to consider the EPA's definition of environmental justice, which go to the next slide. A lot of this challenge is going to be using, this is just a screen grab, but we'll be using some GIS data that NRDC has put together to kickstart the hacking, overlaying the EPA's environmental justice screen with some NRDC data that they've put together for you to look at where these areas are, how much of them overlap, and how could federal and state governments enhance the existing data, analytics, and communication to facilitate brownfield siting. So this could mean open data hubs, data science techniques that you may know, or including some remote sensing or community engagement. Lastly, I want to just talk about that there is already a lot out there from the Environmental Protection Agency on community brownfield redevelopment. So once we share the challenge statement with you, you'll be able to see there's 2 full pages of data linked from the EPA explaining their environmental justice approach and the brownfields. But I don't want to take up too much of our time in the explanations, and we can go into much further detail during the Q&A after this. And I will pass it off to the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee and Jorge.
Yeah.
Right. Let me see if I can introduce Matthew and Lisa. Double check. So I have all the speakers. Oops, sorry. There we go. There we go. Okay, now I see you. Hi. So we got contacted by the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, which is a very important organization. And here we have the Associate Director of Engagement and Outreach, Lisa Reyjula, I think, and the and a Public Affairs Specialist, Matthew Shimo. Okay, so the floor is yours, Matthew and Lisa.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. We're really excited to be here this weekend, and a huge thank you to the Policy Hackathon team, especially to Jorge and to Peter for this opportunity. I'm joined by my colleague, Matt Schimmel, and we're excited to tell you a little bit about us and about the challenge statement. So on the next slide, what is the PRAC? We are the federal government's newest agency. We have the challenge of overseeing $5 trillion in federal pandemic relief. So in March 2020, the CARES Act was enacted to provide support to individuals, to businesses, to healthcare providers, to educational institutions, anyone that was affected by the crisis of the pandemic. And the PRAC was also created in that bill as a new government agency to oversee all the spending to ensure it went to those that it was intended to help. So we are a committee of inspectors general. Inspectors general are the government officials responsible for overseeing how their agencies spend their money and how effective and efficient their programs are. We have a staff of about 50 employees that Matt and I are a part of. We have auditors, we have data visualization specialists, we have data scientists who are analyzing the spending data from all of these pandemic relief programs, and we have investigators and special agents who are tracking down those that tried to defraud these programs. So on the next slide, just very quickly, you'll see the 6 laws here that funded the nearly $5 trillion that we're overseeing. It's spread out among more than 450 federal programs that are being administered by more than 40 agencies. So there is a lot of money, there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of things for us to learn. Our mission is twofold. One, we are promoting transparency to the public so that taxpayers in America can see how their money was spent in response to the pandemic. And then secondly, we are providing comprehensive oversight of the spending to identify cases of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement of pandemic relief dollars. On the next slide, I think we'll talk a little bit about how we're doing that. We're tracking the money on pandemicoversight.gov. That's our website. It's brand new as of April 2020. And this is where we report to taxpayers how their money was spent to address the health and economic effects of the pandemic. We did this within our first 30 days of existence, so you could follow the money. And this was critical because of how quickly pandemic dollars went out the door. Just to give you a few stats, the Paycheck Protection Program, which gave loans to small businesses, they paid out more than $350 billion in loans in just the first 14 days after the CARES Act was passed. The Internal Revenue Service, they sent out $160 billion worth of individual stimulus checks in just the first 21 days after the CARES Act was passed. So that is $500 billion in just 2 programs of the 450 sent out, and some were often sent out with limited controls. The program design either lowered controls that existed or did not have a lot in place. And so that's led to a lot of improper payments or people receiving money that shouldn't have. And in a lot of cases, it's led to fraud. So also on this website, pandemicoversight.gov, we set up an online hotline so that the public can submit tips to us on potential fraud. We really need and value this information from whistleblowers and from citizen watchdogs so that we can try to detect wrongdoing and recover what funds we can for taxpayers. So our goal really at the PRAC is to make federal spending more accessible to the general public so that people can make connections between these numbers that they see and these programs that they hear about and what's happened in their local communities. We are looking to make recommendations as to how the government delivers benefits in crises, in disaster relief situations, so that we can improve how we do this going forward, so that we can ultimately improve public trust in that delivery of benefits. That's really why we're here this weekend. We're really excited to work with all of you and see what you come up with. And Matt, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the specific program that we'd like you to tackle.
Excellent. Good evening, everybody. And on the next slide, you'll see a little bit of context that I think is really going to be critical for you to understand, to help you understand the challenge. So as Lisa had kind of laid out, it's a pandemic. There's a sense of urgency to get the money out quickly to people and to do it in a way that gets it to the target population. And so the Emergency Rental Assistance Program was one of 450 programs. Brand new, $46 billion, designed to reduce eviction, given to state and local governments who would then pass it on to individuals in their communities. These would be individuals that were likely or on the cusp of being evicted. That money could be spent by them on rent or utility payments. Like I said, created in December of 2020 during the middle of a pandemic, this sense of urgency layered on top of the task of having to start a program from scratch. That gave money to a lot of people that had never been in a position before to receive federal dollars directly to run a rental assistance program. The program did briefly coincide with a national eviction moratorium. That moratorium did end, though, 7 months after the program started. The initial funds had to be spent by state and local governments by September of 2022. So you see that urgency again to get money out quickly in a condensed time frame to a target population. And on the next slide, I'll talk about the specifics of the challenge and the issues within it. There is currently no single national source of data on the prevalence and geographic distribution of eviction. The lack of that data hampers the ability of federal, state, and local governments, as well as nonprofits, to target resources effectively for eviction prevention and diversion activities. Some non-governments, like the Eviction Lab that's run out of Princeton University, have tried to fill this vacuum, but the data that they provide is limited and limited to only a few states and a handful of cities. The federal government has provided rent relief money to state and local governments who will then kick it over to qualified individuals. In the absence of national eviction data, the funding was distributed based on population, with state and local government, those with more than 200,000 residents, getting a minimum allocation of $200 million. Although rental assistance, allocating rental assistance based on population rather than need affected the pace of spending and the percentage of total funds distributed to the target population. For example, some states were overfunded and gave money back to the federal government. Other locations ran out of money due to high demand, an indication that they were underfunded. Pandemic relief programs are also supposed to ensure an equitable response and recovery. A 2021 executive order defines underserved communities, but it is unclear if rent relief has flowed appropriately to these communities. And on the next slide is your challenge, which is what information can the federal government use in an emergency to quickly target relief to help reduce evictions in underserved communities? And as you're considering that challenge, also consider what data from the existing program can be used to inform other current and future rent relief programs. If another crisis or pandemic does happen, what can we use from the existing program to help inform in the event that we have to do another one in the future? How else could rent relief be distributed from the federal government? Should it be sent directly to individuals, nonprofits, or state and local governments? Are there non-monetary benefits or policies that could be used or that we should be considering excluding moratoriums that might help reduce rental debt and the possibility of evictions? And also consider the risks that state and local governments would have to accept in exchange for getting money out quickly. I look forward to seeing what the responses are, and I wish all the participants the best of luck.
Great. Thank you, Matthew, Lisa. We are very happy to have you. Now, we're all going to jump into the Zoom rooms. The live stream is going to end here. And we're going to join different Zoom rooms that are in the agenda according to what challenge you would like to ask questions about. So we will all leave this webinar right now and we'll have to head up to the different link. Okay. This room is going to be used for the logistics Q&A. Yeah. Yeah, all the details you should find on Slack. Okay. And thank you very much for being here with us. We are looking forward to a very exciting weekend. Bye now. Oh, yes. So the people who still don't have Teams, there's a last networking event happening right now also. So please make sure that you go there. So they're going to place you in Zoom breakout rooms so that you can form new teams. Yeah, also in person.
If we are not part of the logistics team and would like to be on the Zoom, but we should be there.
Yeah, so on Slack, you have all the other.
Yeah, all the instructions are in Slack. The other locations are in Slack. Yeah.